The morning his heart was meant to give out, Harlem's king dressed for a final meeting. The weight on his chest was a familiar foe, a tightening fist that had been squeezing for weeks. But this wasn't a day for rest. On July 6, 1968, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson chose a crisp suit, knotted his tie before a foggy mirror, and stepped out into a Harlem that felt like it was holding its breath. He was walking toward a confrontation he'd known was coming, not with a person, but with a principle. The Mafia had sent an invitation, and his answer would be delivered not with a shout, but with the quiet, terrible force of a man who has already accepted his own end. This is the story of that final hour, a collision of legacy, poison, and a promise that outlived a heartbeat. To understand the weight of that morning, we must step back into the Harlem Bumpy Johnson had built his life around. This wasn't just a neighborhood, it was a nation within a nation, a vibrant, pulsing heart of black culture, intellect, and survival. By 1968, that heart was under siege, not by obvious forces, but by a creeping, insidious shadow. The promise of the civil rights era clashed with the grim reality of neglected tenements and limited opportunity. And into that gap, a new, devastating product was being pushed: heroin. For over 30 years, Bumpy had been a complicated steward of these streets. He was not a saint, he was a pragmatic power broker. He ran the numbers racket, a ubiquitous, and in many ways, community-tolerated form of gambling. He navigated a treacherous landscape between the Italian mob downtown, the corrupt political machines, and the everyday people of Harlem. He provided a kind of rough order settling disputes that the police wouldn't touch, and his rule was enforced with a fearsome reputation. But within this grey empire, he had drawn one bright, unwavering red line: no hard drugs, no heroin. He had seen its effects in other neighborhoods: the hollowed-out faces, the families destroyed, the communities turned into open-air markets for despair. In his Harlem, that was forbidden. But Bumpy was now 62, and his body was betraying him. Congestive heart failure was a sentence the doctors at Harlem Hospital had made clear. The powerful man who had once stared down Lucky Luciano now grew winded climbing stairs. The vultures, as they always do, sensed weakness. The Genovese crime family, led from a prison cell by the ailing Vito Genovese himself, saw a golden opportunity. With the old king dying, Harlem's resistance would crumble. It was a simple, cruel calculus of power. They decided to make an offer, a generous one, they thought, to ease the transition, to buy the king's silence, or better yet, his blessing. This brings us to the stage, Wells' restaurant on the corner of 132nd and 7th Avenue. It was more than a diner, it was an institution. The air was permanently stained with the scent of strong coffee and frying bacon. The red leather booths were worn smooth by decades of patrons, musicians, politicians, hustlers, and cops. On the walls, photographs of Harlem's royalty looked down: Duke Ellington's grin, Billie Holiday's haunting gaze. And in a place of honor, a picture of Bumpy himself, a testament to his status. His usual booth was in the back, a tactical position facing the door. Old habits, born from a life where survival meant seeing the threat before it saw you. That morning he arrived alone. His wife Mame had pleaded with him to stay home. She felt a chill in the air, a premonition that clings to those who love dangerous men, but Bumpy kissed her, straightened his jacket, and left. There was a performance of normalcy to maintain. He ordered his usual: scrambled eggs, crisp bacon, wheat toast, coffee black as midnight. He unfolded the Amsterdam News asterisk, the voice of Black Harlem, but the words likely swam before his eyes. He was waiting. And all of Harlem, it seemed, was waiting with him. The silence was broken by the creak of the door. 3 men entered, and the low hum of conversation died a slow death. They were specters from another world, clad in expensive, summer suits that screamed downtown. The leader was Anthony "Tony the Fox" Palermo, a respected Genovese capo known for his silver tongue and cold calculations. Flanking him were 2 others: Joe Surprise Santoro, a hardened enforcer whose nickname came from his sudden, violent solutions, and a young, hungry soldier named Paulie Morty, all slicked hair and arrogant eyes. They carried with them an aura of alien power and a single, sleek black leather briefcase. Every person in Wells recognized the scene. This was a delegation. This was business. Dorothy, the waitress who had poured Bumpy's coffee for 20 years, froze mid-pour, the hot liquid splashing onto the counter. Bumpy did not look up. He took a deliberate sip from his cup, the steam momentarily veiling his expression. He turned a page of his newspaper with a slow, deliberate rustle. The message was clear: "You are on my time, in my place." Tony Palermo approached. "Mr. Johnson," he said, his voice a polished blend of respect and authority. "Mind if we join you?" Bumpy finally lowered the paper, his eyes, the color of weathered flint, meeting Tony's. He gestured to the opposite bench with a slight tilt of his head. "It's a free country," he said, his voice a low rumble. The men slid in, their movements stiff. The briefcase was placed on the table between them with a soft, heavy thud. Tony gave a nod, and Joe, surprised, clicked the latches open. The sound was obscenely loud in the quiet room. Inside, neatly bundled and bound with bank straps, were stacks of $100 bills. A small fortune, more money than most of the people in that room would see in a lifetime. $100,000, Tony began, his hands folded neatly on the table. "Tax-free, untraceable. Think of it as a gesture of goodwill, a down payment on a new partnership." He laid out the proposition with the clean logic of a corporate raider. The world was changing. The old games like numbers were fading. The new demand was for heroin. The Genovese family had the supply lines from Europe, from Southeast Asia. The product was coming, with or without him. The only question was who would control it, and who would profit. "We are offering you 30%, Tony continued, his voice dropping to a confidential tone. 30% of all gross profits in Harlem. You don't handle the product. You don't manage the distribution. You simply step aside. You let the new business flow. You ensure a peaceful transition." He gestured to the open case. "This secures your family's future. It lets a legend leave the stage in comfort, with his legacy and his people provided for. It's the smart play." It was a devastatingly rational offer. Here was a dying man, facing the utter finality of his mortality, being handed a key to earthly security for those he loved. It was an offer designed to appeal to a man's basest instincts for survival and provision. And for a moment, the only sound was the distant sizzle of the grill. Then the young one, Paulie, shattered the tension with the clumsy arrogance of youth. "With all respect, Mr. Johnson," he interjected, unable to contain himself, "you're not a young man. You've had a hell of a run. Why die on this hill? Take the money. Enjoy the time you got left. We're gonna do this anyway. This is us showing respect." Bumpy's eyes, which had been fixed on Tony, slowly swiveled to Paulie. The temperature in the booth seemed to drop 10 degrees. A veteran like Tony Palermo felt it. He subtly moved his hand to press down on Paulie's arm, a silent command to shut up. But it was too late. "How old are you, son?" Bumpy asked, his voice deceptively soft, almost gentle. 25, Paulie replied, trying to square his shoulders under that gimlet gaze. 25, Bumpy repeated, as if tasting the number. "I was 29 when I walked into Lucky Luciano's office in Midtown and told him Harlem was off limits. You know what he told me? He said I was a dead man, said his organization would crush me like a bug." Bumpy paused, letting the history saturate the air. "That was 1935, 33 years ago, and here I sit. And lucky, he died in exile, a heart attack in some Italian airport. Just like the one that's coming for me." He shifted his gaze back to Tony. "Where's your boss now, Tony?" "Vito Genovese." Tony shifted slightly, his polished composure showing its first hairline fracture. "He's in Atlanta, federal prison. He's not well." "Dying," Bumpy stated flatly. "Dying of heart trouble, same as me. Funny, ain't it? We spend a lifetime building empires, fighting wars, and in the end, it's our own bodies that turn traitor." But this wasn't a moment for philosophy. It was the moment of decision. Bumpy looked at the open briefcase, at the stacks of green bills that represented the easy path. He thought of Mame, of the security it could buy. Then he thought of the streets outside, of the children playing stickball, of the mothers hanging laundry, of the fragile ecosystem he had spent a lifetime trying to protect, however imperfectly. He reached out a steady hand, a hand that did not tremble despite the storm raging in his chest, and closed the briefcase. The latches clicked shut with a sound of absolute finality. Then, with a slow, deliberate push, he slid it back across the table toward Tony. "You think this is new?" Bumpy's voice was no longer soft. It was the voice that had commanded rooms for decades, sharp and clear. "I watched this poison after the First War. I watched it after the Second. I saw what it did to Chinatown, to parts of Chicago. It turns human beings into ghosts. It eats the soul of a place. He leaned forward, his intensity filling the space. I made a promise to this community. A promise that as long as I was breathing, that particular poison would not run free in these streets. I don't want your money, and I will not have your poison in my neighborhood. Joe, surprised, the enforcer by the door, finally spoke, his voice a gravelly threat. Bumpy, be reasonable. You can't stop this. You're one man. We're an organization. We got politicians, judges, cops on the payroll. What you got? A few old-timers running numbers and a reputation that's about to be buried with you. The pain was coming now in earnest. Bumpy could feel it, a deep, tearing ache beneath his breastbone, a numbness crawling down his left arm. He knew the signs. He was running out of time, but he had one more thing to say. He looked past the money, past the three mobsters, as if addressing the very spirit of Harlem gathered in the room. Let me tell you something about this place, he said, each word measured and heavy. You look and you see a market, a territory, a revenue stream. I see a promise made by the folks who came up from the Carolinas and Georgia with nothing but hope in their pockets, a promise built with their hands in the stockyards and the rail yards, a promise to the next generation that there is dignity here, that there is another way besides destroying yourself to make some rich man in a penthouse richer. He was gasping slightly now, the vice tightening. You bring that garbage here, you're not just selling drugs, you're selling death. You're selling hopelessness. You're murdering the future. He locked eyes with Tony Palermo one last time. The room was utterly still, a frozen tableau. And then Bumpy Johnson delivered the 7 words that would become his epitaph, the condensed essence of his life's defiance. Harlem, he said with his last full breath, doesn't bow, not now, not ever. The sledgehammer hit. Bumpy's face contorted. His hand clutched at his chest, crumpling his crisp white shirt. The coffee cup slipped from his other hand and exploded on the checkered floor, a dark starburst of liquid and ceramic. A gasp, then a scream from Dorothy. Somebody call an ambulance. Chaos erupted, but it was short-lived. The front door of Wells' restaurant burst open with a crash. 4 men filled the doorway, Harlem men, led by Big Jack Johnson, no relation, a mountain of a man who served as Bumpy's primary protector. They had been watching from a car across the street. Their faces were masks of fury as they took in the scene, their boss dying, 3 Italian mobsters at his table. Big Jack took 2 strides forward, his focus on Tony Palermo. What did you do to him? The question was a lethal accusation. Tony, a man who had faced down his own share of violence, went pale. He understood the optics instantly. 3 outsiders from a rival organization sitting with Bumpy Johnson as he clutched his heart and died. It was a death sentence for all of them. Nothing, I swear to God, we were just talking. He just grabbed his chest. You brought your poison to his table, Big Jack growled, his hands curling into fists the size of hams. You disrespected him in his own place, and now he's dying. It was at that moment, through the blinding pain and the grey fog crowding his vision, that Bumpy whispered a final, strategic command. Jack, let them go. His men turned to him, confusion and anger on their faces. Let them go, Bumpy rasped, the effort immense. I want them to tell the story. I want them to carry my answer back. The path to the door cleared. The 3 Genovese men didn't hesitate. They abandoned the briefcase, their offer, their pride, and fled. They scrambled out the door and into their waiting Cadillac, tires screeching as they vanished from Harlem, carrying the image of a king who chose to die standing up. At 8:52 a.m. on July 7, 1968, surrounded by his people in the booth he had made his throne, Ellsworth, Bumpy Johnson's heart stopped. He died as he had lived, on his own terms, unbought and unbowed. The funeral at Abyssinian Baptist Church 5 days later was a spectacle Harlem had not seen before and hasn't seen since. Over 5,000 people lined the streets, a sea of black suits and dresses and hats, a community in mourning for its flawed, fierce protector. The procession stretched for blocks. They weren't just mourning a gangster, they were mourning a symbol of an era, a man who, for all his faults, had drawn a line in the sand. In the aftermath, the Genovese family did try to move in. For about 6 months, they pushed heroin into Harlem, but they encountered unexpected resistance. The old network, The numbers runners and street captains who had learned from Bumpy remembered the code. They harassed the dealers, refused to provide protection, and made the territory hostile. The Genovese never established the iron grip they had in other neighborhoods. Bumpy's final stand had made the conquest too costly, too messy. But history, as it often does, flows around obstacles. In the years that followed, new forces emerged, younger, hungrier, and without the memory of Bumpy's rule. The heroin epidemic he feared did wash over Harlem in the 1970s, followed by the crack cocaine tsunami of the 80s. The devastation was profound and heartbreaking. In that light, could Bumpy's stand be called a victory? The answer is complex. He could not stop the tide of history, economics, and systemic neglect. But what he did was plant a flag. He created a story. In the darkest times, old men on stoops would tell wide-eyed youngsters, there was a man once, a king of these streets, who they offered a fortune, and on the morning he was dying, he looked those devils in the eye and said no. He said Harlem doesn't bow. That story became a fragment of moral armor, a reminder that resistance was possible, that integrity had value, even in the shadowy world of the streets. As for the briefcase with its $100,000, the legend says Tony Palermo never spent a dollar of it. He kept it in a safe, accursed object. When young, arrogant mobsters would come to him for advice, he'd sometimes take it out. See this, he'd say. This is what happens when you think money can buy everything. This is what happens when you disrespect a man who values his word more than his life. Bumpy Johnson was dying, and he chose to die rather than take this, that. That is a thing most of us will never understand. The money, the story concludes, was anonymously donated to a Harlem cultural center after Tony's death. A final, ironic testament to the offer that was refused. Bumpy Johnson's legacy is not one of clean heroism. It is a legacy of contradiction, a criminal who enforced a moral code, a ruthless power broker who drew an ethical line. His story forces a difficult question: what is the true measure of a person? Is it the sins they commit, or the principles they refuse to surrender? On a summer morning in 1968, a dying man showed that the most powerful force in the world is not money, nor fear, nor even time. It is the unconquerable will of a single human being who decides that some things are simply not for sale. He chose his hill, and on that hill he chose to die. And in that choice, he became more than a man. He became a warning, a lesson, and a strangely enduring fragment of hope.